Okay, so this paper is part of a broader research project, which some of you may have heard of, called Poverty and Precarious Employment in Southern Ontario, PEPSO. And it had a number of smaller studies, so this is one of them. And it's co-authored with Wayne Luchuk from the School of Labor Studies at Mac and Sam Brankel, who is at Unicorn. And we were looking at the impact of fixed-term employment on academic research workers. And we know that fixed-term employment is growing and that higher education is a sector where fixed-term contract is very prevalent. We have contract culture. And that there's a growing proportion of research in particular that's done by workers that's funded through grants and or what we refer to in this paper as soft money derived from government and private sources. And most jobs, unlike precarious work in other sectors, tends to be full-time but episodic and well-paid rather than low, but offers very few commitments past the end of a research grant. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about the literature on contract work, but we were really struck by the ways in which grant or soft money culture shape the day-to-day relations of work for contract researchers, and we found three key aspects to work funded through soft money. Some of this will be familiar to contract work generally, but it was particularly unique in this sector, which first was the tendency toward intensified performance, where the respondents felt the ability to meet or exceed workplace performance expectations was integral to motivating employers to include them in new or renewed grants. The arbitrariness of creating or eliminating or reclassifying positions through grant writing, which led to continuous insecurity and the need to move flexibly from role to role and grant to grant. The need to excel was even more acute because of the short duration of grants, where respondents felt that they had very little time to excel and had to be superstars, and that part of this effort was relational, making their PI, their personal or their primary investigator, feel personally attached to them and therefore interested in their welfare and wanting to write them into subsequent grants, or conversely not liking them and exercising discipline by writing them out of grants. The second aspect to soft money was that there was widespread unpaid work. I won't say too much about that, with funding cycles being particularly frenzied. And lastly, and I think the most interesting, was the way in which soft money obscured the employment relationship. So though the university officially held the grant, the researchers viewed the PI as the boss, who had the ability to attract and maintain funding, which directly impacted their job security. So though they were university employees and they had a collective agreement that governed the terms and conditions of their work, they really felt that their day-to-day lives were shaped by the working style and the idiosyncrasies of their PI. So vacation schedules, training, promotions, etc. were all influenced by the personal relations with the PI. For those who had PIs that were rarely at the workplace and valued autonomy, this was great. For PIs who didn't have an interest in their well-being or micromanage them, it was hell. So because they didn't feel the union was directly involved, they felt it contributed little to their job security. There were other paradoxical aspects to soft money, in addition to what I've already mentioned, and that is that for some contract researchers, they felt that contract culture was a source of job security. And the way that they expressed this was that if they got good at writing and administering grants, they would increase their value to time-poor academics who were being pressured to source soft money but didn't have the time to do it. And even this aspect of soft money was complex and contradictory, with respondents reporting that even though they became more highly skilled, their work continued to be invisible and devalued. And this was particularly in gendered ways. All the respondents were women who worked for male academics or physicians, and they had become, and the literature reflects this, dependent on this support of a highly casualized reserve force of female research assistants and coordinators who performed the less prestigious work of research, which has been described as the housework of the academy. So within this growing feminization of research, women's work is devalued and delegitimized because it is seen as peripheral to the core work of knowledge production. So even though respondents became enmeshed in grant writing as a survival strategy, they didn't get any of the rewards that the PI and tenured faculty did. They played a subordinate role in both grant writing and also in the research and knowledge production process. So our contention is this paradigmatic shift to contract research or soft money can be conceptualized as a deeply embedded and emerging form of managerial control, which operates at multiple levels. So for cash-strapped universities, soft money creates a broad continuum of dependence that allows the state to control all aspects of a funded project, including the labor process. And while this control is readily linked to work intensification and unpaid labor, the use of soft money to shape the employment relations is less obvious. It allows a number of things to occur. First, organizations and supervisors retain maximum flexibility to fire or rehire existing contract workers or recruit new ones, especially favorites, within a relatively short period of time, which is defined by the duration of the grant. So if you want to get rid of somebody, you know the grant's going to end. You don't have to go through the nasty business of being an employer and having to justify it. You just say, oh, it's the grant ended. Second, as I said, the awkwardness of actually having to manage, which you would have to do in the standard employment relationship, is rendered invisible, and you have this distant funder making arbitrary decisions who you can blame. Lastly, soft money enables managers to either partially or shift the responsibility for grant writing and networking to the contract workers. So while the appropriation of workers' social and intellectual capital is crucial to their success, PIs had no formal obligation to share the power or prestige associated with their projects, and defined institutional roles and ownership according to the funding agreement. So how do we regulate soft money? Well, we can see this from two key perspectives. One would be the ability of organizations, in this case university administrations, to work collectively. I know it's oxymoronic to say that, to work collectively within the sector to substantially alter the terms and conditions of funding agreements. For example, universities could work together rather than to compete to establish standards for wages, working conditions, and the right to union representation for contract workers. But given the intensely competitive nature of government funding in the academy, this is highly unlikely. So I would say our best hope is widespread unionization. Many academic workers are unionized, particularly graduate students and sessionals. These folks were not in QB, my union, but were represented by another union. But as we learned from our respondents, though they did not see the union as a force capable of regulating this peculiar and highly personal form of work relations. They felt their redeployment rights were rarely enforced by the workers themselves or the union, and that there were too few mechanisms to ensure the right of first refusal, incumbency, or seniority. So in this context, they felt they were better off relying on their ability to secure and maintain contract work through these informal processes, and they were much more dependent on word of mouth and internal recommendations and making PIs love them than going to the union. However, I do firmly believe that collective bargaining has potential to tremendously change the conditions in the sector, to raise standards in wages and benefits and working conditions. The first fight, of course, would be that current agreements are actually enforced, and that all workers, regardless of where the funding is, the source of the funding, have the right to representation. We have agreements in QB, and I'm sure elsewhere, where workers who are funded by soft money are not allowed to be in the union, and that's just wrong. That would be like GM or Ford saying, well, the cars that sell well will pay those workers, and those of you who produce clunkers, you don't get to be in the union. It doesn't matter, excuse me, what the source of the funding is. It's the employer's responsibility. Everybody has the right to union representation. And then another strategy yet to be fully realized in Ontario, at least in the way that it potentially could be, is to pursue coordinated bargaining, in which university workers across classifications negotiate common expiration dates for their collective agreement, and they work toward greatly enhanced job security provisions. How's that?